Right, so this video is going to be on how to avoid dots. Now, dots is a particularly bad case for one-handed solving, so I think this is probably more useful for one-handed solving than two-handed, but it is still quite useful for two-handed because it is arguably the worst case for two-handed as well. When you should learn this, I think you should probably only learn this once you can recognise dots cases before you get them. If you learn it before that, I think you can maybe argue that it's not going to benefit you as much. It also means that you're then going to have to learn an extra thing. You'll have to learn recognition as well, which would then add to the amount of work that you have to do. So I think you should probably start to learn this when you can recognise dots cases before you get them, and probably you're going to be wanting to use it for one hand more likely than two-handed. So the way this works is, rather than solving UL and UR when you get to them, you solve UF and UB instead, or rather UF and UB will already be solved, so it actually just leaves you with a normal edge permutation case. So here's an example. Scramble will be in the description. So here we're going to solve EO, and there are UL and UR edges. So when we get to here, usually we'd solve UL and UR with U prime M2U, and this is going to give us our dots case that we don't want. So instead, we have UF solved and we have UB solved. So if we treat this as the 4C, as 4C is the last step, this is M prime U2, M2U to M prime, which is a much nicer case than we had before. And it was probably even fewer moves, or the same number of moves as a regular insertion, but without E2 moves. So another scramble, again in the description. So here, EO, we set up a UL and UR edges here, which means that we can then get ready to insert them. Now here again, U prime M2 gives us our dots case, except this is dots with an M2. And to solve this, it's exactly the same method that we had before. So line up these to be all the same colour, and you do the same E2 case. Again, even though just go back to that case. UF and UB edges weren't actually solved. You'll see that here this is kind of an M2, or would be an M2 from where it should go. That's fine, because when we do the edge permutation alg, we then just finish with an M2 afterwards. So that's how you do it for the most basic cases, where you have your UL and UR edges on DF and DB. But that won't always happen, so some of the other times you'll have different cases for inserting UL and UR edges. So this next scramble here should show one of those. So here we can see that other UL and UR edges is in DB. So we can set up here, and oh look, we're going to get a dots case. So usually to insert this case here, we do MU to M prime, but dots. So instead, again, we're going to treat UF and UB as being solved. Now this is a much harder case to recognise. It would have been easier if, rather than having this dots plus M2 case, if we just had regular dots instead. You will find a lot of these cases much easier to recognise. But we can still recognise it from here. So it's a 3-cycle case. You can solve this edge here, and that's our 3-cycle. And then we can finish with an M2. So again, it's the same idea. We just treated UF and UB as being solved, and then we had a 3-cycle case. So the last scramble shows a similar situation. So here we've got as being here, and oh look, it's the M prime U to M prime case. So this is where we have a solid bar here, whereas if you recall last scramble, these colours were adjacent. So this is solvable like that to give us our dots case. But again, we can treat UF and UB as being solved, instead. So here, again, it's harder to see because we have the dots plus M2 case rather than regular dots, but this is our solved edge, and the edge cycle is MU2, MU2, M2. And then again, just finish off. So again, these cases can be quite hard to recognise, but if you were to do them again and again, you would actually get to the point where you can quite easily recognise which edge cycle it is, because it's only going to be one of two cases, or their mirrors. So even though they're hard to recognise now, if you just do them again and again, you get to the point where you can recognise them instantly. However, there's an easy way of recognising these those last two cases. So if I just compare them here, so I've got another cube. So this was one case where we had an opposite edge in here, and the other case we had a solid bar, and again our other edge is down there. So what we do in these two cases is we just swap our usual UL and UR algorithm. So for this one here, if we were to do this algorithm, which is MU2 it begins with, whereas this one begins with M prime U2. So if we were to do this one beginning with MU2, MU2M, and then just insert them, because we've brought them down to the bottom layer, this will then skip nicely without having to remember or recognise which cycle it is. If we were to have this case here, if we were to think of the bars being solved, it's going to be M prime U2 to begin with. So we do M prime U2M instead of solving it directly, we are just bringing them to the bottom layer where we can insert them. And again, that's just going to give us a nice skip case. If you were to have actually I'll do it around. So if we were to have this case here but with regular dots, you can actually see that the three cycles are a lot easier to recognise, but we can still do it with this shortcut way of solving with MU2 rather than M prime U2. Okay, so that's how to skip dots. It's more useful for one-handed than two-handed, like I said, but I think it's still probably worth learning for two-handed anyway, because it doesn't use any extra moves, and there's no E2 moves.